Hey, friends, and welcome to the very first episode of Screaming, the podcast where we celebrate everything horror. From the biggest movie news and trailer drops to casting announcements, first look photos, reviews, franchise updates, and whatever terrifying thing has horror fans talking. This is going to be our place to geek out on all of it. And if you are wondering why I'm starting another podcast, honestly, it's because horror has always been one of my biggest passions. Don't ask me why. People ask me why all the time, and I'm like, do I need a reason? No, the fuck I don't. I grew up absolutely obsessed with scary movies, paranormal, anything spooky, Halloween. I was the kid renting slashers from the video store, watching behind the scenes documentaries, reading IMDb trivia, and convincing my friends to watch those movies that they absolutely did not want to watch. And horror has always been my comfort genre, which probably says something about me. I don't know what it says, and maybe something I should unpack in therapy, but that's for a different podcast. And some of you, depending on who you are, might remember that years ago I hosted a true crime podcast with my friend called Murder and Margs. And then I also started a TikTok, and during the lead up to Scream 5, Scream 6, I found myself constantly making these TikTok update videos that then also proceeded to YouTube videos. And I just really miss that. I was talking about the casting announcements for Scream, the filming locations, theories, trailer breakdowns, and every little piece of news that dropped. And I absolutely loved it. It reminded me how much fun it is to talk about horror with other people who get just as excited as I do. It's like an outlet. And I ended up making some really cool online friends, both on Instagram and big YouTubers. And it was just such a neat community. The horror community is so cool. And it's funny. Sometimes I say horror really fast and it sounds like whore, but I'm saying horror. Okay. So somewhere along the way, I stopped making those videos, but I never stopped following the genre. Obviously, I still watch big creators like what is his name? Critical Overlord and Jake. Gosh, his name is slipping my mind. Killjoy Jake. Come on, Josh. And 3C Films. These big people who update the horror genre all the time, all the other genres too, but those ones really focus in on a lot of horror news. And we would comment on each other's stuff, and I just kind of started missing that. I still read horror news every single day almost. I still watch every trailer for a horror movie the second that it drops. I still count down to every new release. I still leave the theater immediately wanting to talk about what I just saw with somebody. So I figured, why not just build another podcast around it? And right now, my plan is to release one episode a month. That feels manageable with everything else that I have going on, and it'll give us enough time to find plenty of news that we can, pile up into one episode. But if you all really enjoy this and enough people start listening, obviously I will add more episodes. I'd absolutely love to make it more frequent. Horror news never really stops. And honestly, neither does my excitement for it. So if there's an audience for this, then we're going to grow it together. So at the moment, Screaming, this podcast, does not have its own Instagram or website or any social media pages. I'm keeping things very simple from the get-go while we get this off the ground. But you can follow me on my other podcast Instagram, which is called Hot Air with Joshua Robert. The Instagram and TikTok are at _HotAirPod. I will post updates that I'm posting new episodes of Screaming and episode announcements, and any other things that come to mind, little news things over there. And eventually, I'd love for Hot Air to grow into a Hot Air network that houses a bunch of different podcasts and genres where different shows all live under that one umbrella. And of course, Screaming would be the very first expansion of that. And listen, Hot Air, that podcast, is vastly different. This one for me is this is a hobby. Screaming and horror are a hobby, right? They're an outlet just to talk about things that are not that serious. Let's be real. Hot Air, on the other hand, I go into politics, therapy, dating, relevant news stories, all based around the queer community. So it's vastly different, but hey, horror genre also is in line with the queers because we fucking love gays love horror. So it all kind of blends together. But whether you're here because you love slashers, supernatural horror, psychological thrillers, haunted houses, found footage, Stephen King adaptations. I mean, we can never get enough of those. A24 nightmares, or you're just looking for someone to obsess over horror movies with every single month. Welcome. I am genuinely so excited. I've been thinking about doing this for a really long time, and I'm just at the point where I'm like, why not? Okay. Enough blabbing about that. Let's scream. So we're going to start with my fresh out of the theater first genuine reactions to Evil Dead Burn. I'm not joking when I say I just left the theater. I came home, wrote this segment, sat down in my pod studio. No overthinking, no sitting on Letterbox for like 3 hours trying to convince myself that I either loved it or hate it. This is exactly how I'm feeling while I'm basically walking from my car, driving my car, and walking into my apartment. And honestly, I really I really liked it. I dug it. I was into it. The Evil Dead franchise has always been a little hit or miss for me, and I completely respect the originals because they changed horror forever, just like all of those, 70s and 80s films did, but they're very much products of their time, right? I actually find myself gravitating more towards these newer entries, Evil Dead in 2013, Evil Dead Rise, and now Evil Dead Burn. I cannot wait to see. I think it's Evil Dead Wrath is the next one that's supposed to be a prequel. I mean, I live for a prequel. Why not reinvent something and add some more lore? I'm so into it. They have managed to keep the absolute insanity that defines this franchise while making it feel accessible to newer audiences. And I think that Burn continues that trend really well. And I should say, before I say anything else, spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. Okay. I'm talking basically everything in this episode. I'm not going to give away like every single solitary plot point in detail, but like if you have not seen Evil Dead and then the other movies, when we get to those sections that I'm going to talk about, you probably do not want to listen unless you like things being spoiled for you. So without spoiling absolutely everything, right away, the movie follows Alice, who is grieving the death of her husband when she reunites with his family at the remote countryside home. Well, that spoiled a lot already. Okay, so naturally, because this is an Evil Dead movie, grief isn't the only thing that is waiting for them. The Necronomicon, I thought I was going to mess that up. Necronomicon, Necronomicon, Necronomicon. I guess I can say it 3 times. Okay. The Necronomicon and the Deadites make sure that family reunions go just about as well as you would expect in an Evil Dead movie. So before long, possession starts spreading through the family, old secrets begin surfacing, and what starts as an emotional drama kind of vibe transforms into 2 straight hours of absolute carnage. And like, I fucking mean that. One thing I appreciated immediately is that once this movie gets going, it basically never lets you breathe. There is a brief period early on where it establishes the family dynamics. And like, I'll admit it, it took me like a hot second to figure out who everybody was and how everyone was connected. I will say like there was a few relationships that I was confused about, and I think they could have like set that up better, or perhaps I just wasn't in my movie watching mode yet. But once those pieces are in place, the movie absolutely floors the accelerator and never really eases off until the credits roll. And even after the credits roll, it's still going. And can we talk for a second? I'm going to talk about the gore, okay? Because yes, we know Evil Dead, the gore is absolutely there. There were multiple moments where I quite literally covered my mouth in the theater. I gasped out loud more than once, which almost never happens anymore because horror has desensitized me over the years. And also like it's hard to shock me in a movie and surprise me. But what's interesting is that for me personally, I actually don't think this is gorier than Evil Dead Rise, the last Evil Dead film. I know that the marketing kept telling us that this would be the most brutal Evil Dead ever. Even the director had said that there are scenes that had to be cut just to secure an R rating. So, obviously we didn't get to see those, but he did also say that there would be an even bloodier director's cut on the way, which we know I love a director's cut. Well, you don't know that. I know that. Now you know it. And while it's definitely a disgusting film in all the ways that you want an Evil Dead movie to be. I actually appreciated that it wasn't trying to top itself like every 5 minutes. There were still plenty of like, what the actual fuck moments, but the violence never became like so overwhelming that I checked out emotionally. However, I do know people that would not love it. So, like, if you don't like blood and gore, obviously an Evil Dead film is not for you. But I felt like Evil Dead Rise was gorier and had moments that like my skin was crawling like more frequently than Evil Dead Burn. But I appreciated that it wasn't like we're just going to go so over the top. And one thing that I think this movie absolutely nails is how it references the history of the franchise. Because, you know, when you have this many additions and sequels to a film, they do start to tend to reference, you know, these little plot points and things that the fans love. It gives longtime fans these little winks without constantly like elbowing you in the rib, being like, remember this, don't forget. Like, there are echoes of the chainsaw. If you know, you know. There are visual callbacks that reminded me of the bathroom sequence in Evil Dead Rise, household objects that become weapons in that wonderfully deranged Evil Dead way, including one sequence where he didn't really use it as a weapon, but he got that electric meat cutter out, which, if you remember from the original, they used that electric meat cutter to chop an arm. Like, it felt like the filmmakers sprinkled these little homages throughout instead of building entire scenes around nostalgia, right? Like, it was sprinkled, a little bit of sugar, a little bit of spice here and there, but it wasn't like, oh, we're repeating a scene from a previous film. And honestly, I prefer that approach. And what I'm about to say hurts me to kind of say, but I say this as someone whose favorite franchise is Scream. Okay, Scream is my life. If you could not tell by the thumbnail for this podcast and the name of the podcast, I absolutely love every Scream, some more than others, but even I can admit that those movies more than occasionally become a little too obsessed with reminding us of the original. And Burn shows much more restraint. It trusts that fans are going to catch the references without making them the entire point of the movie. The movie is not just to reference the original. And another thing that I really enjoyed was how inventive the Deadites felt this time around. And after 6 movies, you'd think that possession would start becoming repetitive, but they still found a fresh way to make these demons weird and unpredictable and also really hilarious. Like, it's kind of weird to say that these possessed Deadites were funny, but they were, okay? Like, that's something people sometimes forget about Evil Dead. It is also supposed to be funny, not comedy funny, but like unhinged funny. Like, did I really just watch that happen? That kind of funny. And the Deadites have always been very theatrical. They taunt, they sing, they manipulate. They're as interested in emotionally tormenting you as they are tearing you physically apart. And Burn, Evil Dead Burn, continues that tradition while still introducing some genuinely unsettling new behavior that I'm not going to spoil that stuff because I think it is actually quite shocking if and when you are someone who's going to, I assume that if you haven't seen it and you're still listening, you're going to see it because this is a horror movie podcast, but there's some stuff in there that is just fucking nuts. Okay, and let's get to the ending because I actually think it's one of the more interesting franchise endings that we've had in quite a while. So, again, spoilers, Alice ultimately survives after using both the Kandarian. After using both the Kandarian dagger and a jackhammer during a brutal final confrontation at a construction site and like finally putting an end to Deadite Will before escaping this wild nightmare that she was a part of. But what really caught my attention wasn't necessarily how she won. It was why everything happened in the first place. And like, I had to think about this on my drive home, this like ending. I had to like really piece it together because there's a lot that happens in this movie. And I was like, what exactly like went down? What does this ending mean? So throughout the film, we learn that the Price family wasn't just randomly unlucky. Okay. their grandfather had spent years researching the Necronomicon. And the implication is that this family has been connected to the Deadites across generations. And so suddenly, the evil isn't just something that people accidentally stumble across anymore. It is hereditary, right? It's woven into bloodlines. And that's a pretty major expansion of the mythology because it suggests these demonic forces may have been cultivating certain families for decades instead of simply waiting for someone to read from the Book of the Dead. Because in this one, as far as I can recall, nobody actually finishes those words and reads from the book. I'm pretty certain. He's playing a recording in the beginning, and so maybe that is what, made everything emerge, but it wasn't like someone sat down and read these words again, right? So, and then we get to not one, but two post-credit scenes. And I love that when I'm in a movie, everyone gets up and leaves and I whip out my phone. I'm like, does Evil Dead Burn have post-credit scenes or whatever movie I'm watching? Like, we know better than to leave the movie theater now, people. So first of all, if you're seeing this movie, stay until the very end, not halfway through the credits. Because again, you have one and then two scenes. The very end, there's another one. So we got these two stingers, and they're certainly both worth talking about. So the mid-credit scene gives us one last deliciously twisted little joke involving Polly, who is the grandma who survives in full deadite form long enough to infect yet another unsuspecting victim. It is a little humorous, it's a little dark, it's very quick and gross. Like how she gets away before the credits roll is absolutely disgusting. But again, won't spoil it because I've spoiled a lot, but those are worth just seeing for yourself. But it's exactly the kind of bleak humor that this franchise thrives on. And like that could lead to a whole entire another film, just that alone. But the final post-credit scene, that's going to have horror fans arguing online for like a little bit. So we return to the crematorium where an urn connected to the events of Evil Dead Rise becomes the center of one final shock. So out of nowhere, Ellie Bixler, the possessed mother from Rise, returns in deadite form, delivering the chilling line, "Mommy's back." And like, I'm not even going to try to say it like she said, but then she violently claims another victim. She literally snaps a girl's friggin' neck in half, like a little, 10-year-old girl. It's a moment that's equal parts awesome and also a little bit confusing because I don't think as many people are religiously following the Evil Dead movies because they're not often connected. They're not really all that connected, and they're each different from the next. So on one hand, I absolutely loved seeing Ellie again because she was one of the franchise's best modern Deadites. And on the other hand, I was like, how exactly does that work? Like, didn't she get obliterated? Didn't we already establish that she was gone? Like, the internet is already split on whether this breaks the established rules or whether it's actually expanding them. So I imagine in this next film, this next Evil Dead film, we will probably find out more and how she's even back. But personally, I think the bigger takeaway isn't Ellie herself, it's what her return represents. So up until now, every Evil Dead movie has mostly functioned as its own contained nightmare. Sure, there's the reoccurring books and the mythology and Bruce Campbell's ash that's looming over everything, but these stories have largely been kind of standalone. Evil Dead Burn feels like the first time the franchise is like intentionally trying to build a connected universe, and the return of Ellie, the introduction of hereditary curses, the emphasis on this Kandarian dagger, and the suggestion that these deadites persist in ways that we didn't fully understand before, all point toward a mythology that is going to become much larger than just like one haunted cabin or one unlucky apartment building. Like whether every single lore decision works, like I don't know. I'm honestly not even sure yet, but like I need to sit with it. But like I respect the ambition. Like I'm kind of here for it. A lot of people don't love when franchises or people take over these franchises, new directors, new writers, and they add their own spin on it. But like that's art, that's creativity. I'm always here for reinventing the wheel or adding another plot point or layer to the story. So overall, I walked out smiling, which feels, I guess, like a weird thing to say after watching 2 hours of people being dismembered in increasingly creative ways. I was entertained from beginning to end. I laughed. I definitely cringed, covered my mouth, gasped, I winced, I jumped out of my seat multiple times. That's exactly what I want from an Evil Dead movie. Like my heart was racing at certain points, and that it takes a lot for me to get there in a film. It doesn't reinvent horror, and maybe it doesn't even quite like reach the emotional highs of Evil Dead Rise, but it's fast, it's nasty, it's wildly entertaining ride that respects its legacy without like drowning you in nostalgia. So for me, that is a huge win. Like I would probably land somewhere like I don't know, around like an 8 out of 10. 8 out of 10 Deadites. Like, but more importantly, I'm like so excited to see where we're gonna go next with the franchise. Like, if Burn is laying the foundation for a bigger interconnected Evil Dead universe, and like hand me the Necronomicon because like I am all in. And we're going to move on from Evil Dead Burn, and we're going to talk about this sneaky little movie that completely caught me off guard this year and honestly caught basically the entire world off guard. Obsession. Like, I don't think anybody expected this little independent horror film to become the phenomenon that it has. Horror fans have been talking about it nonstop for weeks. Critics have been praising it, audiences have embraced it, and somehow this tiny little movie with a reported production budget of around $1 million has gone on to earn $400 million worldwide. Can you, like, that's unfathomable. It's almost unbelievable. Like, that is a wild return on investment. And it has become one of the most profitable horror films that has ever been made. Ever. And like stories like this are exactly why I love horror. Every few years, a movie comes along that reminds Hollywood that you do not need a $200 million budget, like a giant cinematic universe, or decades of franchise history to create something that people genuinely want to see. Sometimes all you need is an original idea or a spin on an idea that's been done before, a filmmaker that has a distinct voice and a vision, and the confidence to just like let that idea speak for itself. The success has also put writer and director Curry Barker squarely in Hollywood's spotlight. So before Obsession, he was mostly known for independent work and online filmmaking, and now he's suddenly become one of the most exciting names in horror. There has already been plenty of speculations that studios are lining up to hand him the keys to like major horror franchises. And honestly, after seeing this movie with a giant budget for a major franchise, I can completely see him like nailing that shit. And I totally understand why these studios are like eyeing him. Like whether he ends up directing an established horror property or continues creating original stories, I think that he has proven he has a real understanding of suspense and atmosphere and just creativity and how to try new things. Like that's something that can't be taught. So going into Obsession, I mean, I tried to avoid as much information as possible. It's hard to not get your hopes up when everyone is raving about a film, like no matter where you turn. So it makes it a little difficult to go in not expecting the most like insane movie you've ever seen. And like also these days, trailers reveal half of the movie, which I just don't understand why studio marketing departments do that. Like, you should know better. There's all kinds of social media spoilers every which way, and like by opening weekend, you've probably already seen like every major jump scare in like a TikTok edit. So like I kind of knew the premise. I tried really hard to avoid it, but it revolves around the supernational. It revolves around a supernatural wish that quickly spirals into something much darker, but I intentionally avoided reading reviews or breakdown videos or anything I scrolled by on YouTube because I wanted to experience it the way the audiences used to experience horror before social media ruined everything. But like walking into a theater with almost no idea what was about to happen. And unfortunately, I didn't walk into a theater, but I did pay to rent it at home. And I think, watching it at home, always cozy, but avoiding spoilers definitely made my experience way more enjoyable. So, again, spoiler alert. I'm about to break down this plot, okay? The story itself takes, well, a familiar horror concept. Be careful what you wish for. That's the horror concept. Be careful what you wish for. But it gives it a fresh little spin. And that's not an easy thing to do because, like, horror has been exploring cursed wishes and monkey paw stories for fucking ever. Like, truly, it's been done to death. It is one of the oldest supernatural tropes in the genre. But Obsession manages to make it feel modern by grounding everything in like, I guess, loneliness and insecurity and the obsessive way that people can convince themselves that they deserve someone else's love. And rather than relying on some giant supernatural mythology with pages of rules to remember or like an expert that knows everything, the film keeps its premise surprisingly simple. I was expecting it to go to some other places, but I really appreciated that it was very simple and easy to understand, easy to follow because we weren't getting into the weeds there. Like, that's probably one of its greatest strengths. Like, it never becomes overly complicated. The horror grows naturally from the characters' decisions rather than constantly introducing like random new twists simply just like for the sake of shocking audiences or even like introducing mythology that's not really well thought out that nobody gives a shit about in the first place. And another thing that I appreciated was how quickly the movie gets going. It was, again, at first I was like, we got to get to the good shit here because I've been waiting to watch this movie, but they also have to establish these characters. There are so many horror films that spend nearly an hour introducing characters now before anything interesting actually happens. And Obsession did what? Maybe like 10 minutes? 10 minutes of this, but so it didn't really waste time. It establishes its premise, introduces a central kind of conflict here, and starts building tension. I mean, almost immediately. I found myself definitely engaged very early on because the pacing keeps everything moving forward. And similarly to Evil Dead Burn, once it starts, it doesn't slow down. This movie, Obsession, kind of trusts that the audience is smart enough to fill in some of the blanks instead of over explaining every little detail. And every time that happens in a movie, it reminds me of my dad because he'll always be like, well, why did they say that? Or why are they doing that? But it's like that's what film is supposed to do. You're supposed to ask yourself those questions and be able to answer it yourself if it's done well. If a film is made well, you don't have to, lay out every single detail. You can make the connection of who someone's related to or who someone has a crush on or the history between these characters just based a little bit on what's dropped throughout the script. And like Obsession did that very well. Now, I admit there was one thing that took me a while to adjust to, and it feels weird to say because I ain't judging, but it was the performances. So for the first like 15-ish minutes, like I was not completely sold on the acting. And I don't know why, because they're all great actors. Like I honestly wondered like if I was if I was wrong or like maybe the dialogue felt like a little awkward or unnatural, but as the movie continued, I realized that the awkwardness fits the characters and it from my perspective, it was probably intentional because the switch up was so quick. These characters are socially uncomfortable people who don't always know what to say or how to behave. And honestly, they're very like natural. And I think that's probably why it felt a little bit odd. But once I accepted that, the performances started working for me instead of like against me. By the second half of the movie, when shit had hit the fan, I was invested. I understood why Curry Barker chose this particular style of performance. And where I feel that this movie truly excels is atmosphere. If you're expecting an endless barrage of jump scares or nonstop gore, then you are probably going to be disappointed. That's not the kind of movie that this is. Obsession is more interested in creating an overwhelming sense of dread than it is like making you like spill your popcorn every 10 minutes. There's an uncomfortable kind of vibe that settles over the entire movie. And I mean, eventually it becomes obvious why, and it doesn't really let up. Even during these quieter scenes, there's a constant sense that something isn't right. And then when something starts to feel right and you're like, oh, this is a chill moment, it turns its back on you and becomes not right anymore. So Curry Barker understands that some of the most effective horror comes from anticipation rather than payoff. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't what you see, it's what you think might happen next. And that said, I do think that my expectations of what might happen next did work against me a little bit. Like, based on everything that I was hearing online, even though I tried really hard to avoid stuff, but when you hear that a film is like out of this world and it's the best thing ever, you're gonna expect something that is, like, wildly dark and far more disturbing. I thought I was about to watch a movie that would really push some boundaries a little bit more, deliver shocking moments, and lean heavily into psychological horror with some genuinely, like, brutal imagery, I guess. Instead, that I found Obsession to be more creepy than it was terrifying. However, at the end, a lot goes down, a lot happens. It does get really weird really quick. And so that gave me what I wanted, but like I wanted a little bit more weirdness. But I can totally understand why that happened. That's not necessarily a criticism because creepy horror absolutely has a place, but I don't think it's quite as intense, I guess, as some people made it out to be. So I was expecting, I guess, some other things to go down. So if you're expecting like Terrifier level violence or something emotionally devastating like Hereditary, that's not really what this movie is aiming for. It is kind of a slow building supernatural-ish thriller that prefers discomfort over outright like brutality, which again, respect it. Now, the one actual criticism that I have, and the only reason I can talk about this is because I did study film for 2 years. I do not have a degree, but I've always been passionate about film. Studied it for 2 years. We had to study movies like Nosferatu and Memento, and like I mean, countless films. Some that I fell asleep during in class, and others that I did not. We had to make our own films. Like my teacher was really intense, so I can talk about the editing. Okay, that's my only criticism. At certain points, there were multiple moments in the movie where I thought like I don't know, my TV froze or something had gone wrong and I had to rewind. I wondered if like I skipped something. I was like, what's happening? Like a few of these cuts happened so suddenly that they kind of interrupted the natural rhythm of the story. And I did rewind and I was like, wait, I have to be wrong here. Did I miss something? And I just realized that those weren't technical issues on my end. They were deliberate editing choices. And sometimes that happens. You get to the editing room, the movie is done being filmed, and you have to work with what you have, right? Like when you're on a budget of what was it, $1 million, maybe. I honestly think it was like 800,000. Like you don't have the money to go back and do reshoots because I imagine he probably would have to make that editing flow a little bit better. Like it just is what it is. So personally, those things didn't work for me, but I totally understand why. And instead of creating like a little mystery and disorientation, it occasionally pulled me out of the experience a little bit. Then I became a little bit distracted. I'm also ADHD and I don't like criticizing people's art negatively, but this is my podcast. I'm just being open and honest. And I totally understand why those edits were made. You can't reshoot when your budget is so minimal. But despite those issues, listen, Curry Barker, if you're listening, I still had a really good time with this movie. It is creative, it's confident, and perhaps most importantly, it feels original, even though it's a be careful what you wish for story. Like in a landscape where horror is increasingly dominated by sequels, legacy characters, remakes, cinematic universes, like which I love all that stuff, but there's something incredibly refreshing about seeing a filmmaker introduce a completely new concept that audiences immediately connect with. It reminds me of when Scream came out. Low budget, they didn't know what was going to happen. It was a sleeper hit. It fucking took over, and now we have 7 Screams. Like, Obsession could spawn multiple sequels that might have just simple different titles. Like, what could be another? Someone could wish for to be the richest person on the planet, right? But with that comes, yeah, I don't know, because I'm not writing the movie, but some terrible things. And that could just be called greed. Like, it could just be single words. I made a wish, someone's obsessed with me. I made a wish, greed, bitches coming after me. This could go anywhere. So even if every creative decision didn't work for me in this movie, I'd much rather watch an ambitious original film that takes risks than another safe sequel that simply repeats what has worked before. So I think that obsession demonstrates why horror continues to be one of the healthiest genres in filmmaking now more than ever, which I am so excited about. We have so many spooky movies to look forward to. People are finally loving and uplifting horror. Like, horror fans are willing to support original ideas, which I hope studios will see and make more original ideas. They show up for independent filmmakers, they embrace creative storytelling. And because horror movies can often be made for relatively modest budgets, like, you don't need a lot of CGI and superhero costumes and stuff. Filmmakers are given the freedom to experiment in ways that other genres simply cannot. When one of those experiments connects with audiences, you get stories like this: an independent horror movie becoming one of the biggest financial success stories of the year, if not in a very long time. So, overall, when I finished watching Obsession, I was satisfied. Did it completely reinvent horror? No. But was it an original idea? Yes. Did it scare me as much as I had hoped? No. Did some of the editing choices frustrate me? Yes. But I also can't deny that I had fun. It kept me engaged because there were some really interesting choices that were made. It went absolutely haywire insane at the end. It offered a fresh take on a classic horror trope, and it introduced me to a filmmaker whose future projects are going to be on the top of my must watch list. I'm really can't wait to see what he does, what Curry Barker does with a big budget. Like, that's a pretty big accomplishment for a first time filmmaker. And if I had to give Obsession a rating, I'd probably land around 7 out of 10, maybe ish. Like, it's original, stylish. It definitely has its own tone. It's unsettling, and it's proof that some of the most exciting horror is not coming from massive studios. It is coming from filmmakers who simply have a great idea and the passion to bring it to life. And if this is where Curry Barker's career is like sort of beginning, I cannot wait to see what's next. But I cannot believe after all of that, I didn't even talk about our lead actress. What a highlight for this movie, and she is like blowing up everywhere. I've heard that she's been talking to Marvel about being in the movies. I believe I'm gonna probably butcher her name, Indy Navarrete. That's what we're gonna go with. Okay, like, her switch up and her like as I can't even explain it very well, but her switch up between when she's like just becoming obsessed with the guy in this film. What's his name? Bear? Is that his name again? Yeah, Bear. God, Josh, get it together. And you can see in her mind, she's bouncing between her normal character, which is Nikki, and then the obsessed version of Nikki. And the facial expressions that she makes, her body language, the way that she moves about a room at certain times, and she will go from being absolutely insane to being like, just kidding, to being sweet, to flipping the fuck out. And like, for an actress to just switch like that and it be believable is like quite a wild accomplishment. So like, obviously she was the ultimate highlight for this film. I think it was so badass, her performance. There were times when I laughed because it was so shocking, her switch up. And I watched a reel of somebody's today on YouTube, a reel, a short, whatever you call it, about Indy talking about her inspirations and the movies she watched leading up to this to find these mannerisms and facial expressions. And it showed little clips from Hereditary and Get Out and how she used those and where she used those in the film. And I just thought that was really interesting, really smart to do your homework, watch those good horror movies that are independent horror movies that went big, and use inspiration from those characters that made an impact to create this fucking buck wild, crazy ass Nikki Freeman character. So she was a highlight. I give her a 10 out of 10, obviously. And I also cannot wait to see what she does next. And if I was straight, she would be my type. Okay, we're going to move on from Obsession, and we're going to talk about, I mean, this is probably the biggest piece of horror news this month, and I don't think that Peacock could have picked a better day to drop. Well, they could have. It could have been Friday the 13th, but it was Monday the 13th. We finally got our teaser for Crystal Lake, the long-awaited Friday the 13th prequel series. And as a horror fan, I don't care if that release date was intentional or not. It would have been great if it was on Friday the 13th, but I loved it. You've got a 13 in there, whatever. There's something so satisfying about dropping a teaser on a date that corresponds with what the theme of the film is. You know, I'm into it. It's cheesy, it's fun. Like, it immediately tells horror fans, like, we're back. So, like, I think it's the 30th anniversary of Scream coming up this December, question mark, I think. And so I'm like, they better announce something else then, because like you can't miss this. So I was down with the releasing it on the 13th day of a month. But this is a project that has had one of the rockiest development histories imaginable. Well, that and, you know, Freddy Krueger, Nightmare on Elm Street. But also we do have an update for that, but that will be in a later episode. It was first announced years ago that there was like creative shakeups behind the scenes with Friday the 13th, with the franchise. Different showrunners came and went, and for a while, like, I kind of was like, nothing's gonna happen. Nothing's happening here. But now it's real. The teaser is here. The series premieres on October 15th on Peacock, and suddenly one of horror's biggest icons is finally making his way back onto our screens. But sort of. Kind of not, but sort of. Okay. So one thing I think that is important for people to know is that this is not another remake of the original movie, and it isn't Jason running around Camp Crystal Lake in a hockey mask, hacking up teenagers for 8 episodes. In fact, Jason really isn't the focus at all. Crystal Lake, the show, is a prequel that centers on Pamela Voorhees, much like, oh shoot, what was that called? Bates Hotel? Is that what that show was called? Similar concept here, okay? We are focusing on Pamela Voorhees, Jason's mother, long before she became the original killer in the 1980 film. Not really long before, because, well, we'll get to the plot points in a second. But the series begins after the drowning of Pamela's young son, Jason. And it is exploring how unimaginable grief slowly transforms her into the woman that horror fans have known for more than 40 years. And like, I love that angle. Fascinating angle, because if you really think about it, Pamela Voorhees has always been one of horror's most important villains, yet she's also one of the least explored. She appears in only a small portion of the original film, and everything we know about her has largely come from exposition and flashbacks. This series is giving her origin story. A lot of people don't even know when they watch Friday the 13th for the first time. They think Jason's going to be running around with his machete and his hockey mask. And I mean, that doesn't happen in this movie. It is Pamela Voorhees going after the camp counselors and killing them. Spoiler alert again. So leading the cast is Linda Cardellini, and I genuinely I don't think can think of a better choice to play Pamela Voorhees. Like, what a kick-ass actress. She's one of those actors who can be incredibly warm and sympathetic one moment, depending on the role, and then wild and unsettling and like out there kooky the next. So whether you know her from Dead to Me, Freaks and Geeks, or The Curse of La Llorona, she's always brought this emotional depth to her performances. Or Scooby-Doo, like, she's just so good. She's in so many iconic films, I can't even list them. According to showrunner Brad Caleb Kane, she was actually the first and only person that he envisioned for Pamela, because he wanted someone capable of portraying a woman who is grieving, unraveling, and becoming increasingly dangerous all at the same time. And that makes me incredibly excited, because Pamela can't just be a slasher villain. She has to be someone that we can relate to and understand, even if we completely reject the choices. I hope we reject the choices that she eventually makes because she kills a bunch of people. We should reject those. But relating with her grief and the emotion around losing her son, like humanizing her before she goes a little bit crazy. And the cast also includes Callum Vincent as young Jason Voorhees, William Ketlett, Devin Kessler, Cameron Scoggins, and Gwendolyn Sundstrom, along with familiar names from the original mythology like Crazy Ralph, Barry, Claudette, and Officer Dorf making appearances. If you know, you know. So if you've watched the original Friday the 13th, you're going to recognize those character names immediately. And I love that the series isn't pretending that the source material doesn't exist. Instead, it seems to be expanding the mythology while respecting what came before. Rumor has it that every season is going to, I guess, remake or replicate one movie and expand upon it, which I think is a really cool idea. Now, let's talk about the teaser itself because it's exactly what a teaser should be. It doesn't explain everything. It doesn't spoil every major set piece. If anything, it doesn't give us enough. It doesn't give away every kill. Instead, it's basically built around atmosphere. You get the feeling that something is a little bit wrong in Crystal Lake. The imagery is moody, haunting, like quick little clips, a little dreamlike at times. There's a heavy sense of her grief, of Pamela's grief over everything. And rather than feeling like a traditional slasher right away, it feels closer to a psychological thriller. That's actually something that Brad Caleb Kane has talked about. He describes the series as having the DNA of a slasher, but playing more like a paranoid 1970s psychological thriller. It's kind of reminding me of Alfred Hitchcock, which I think was pre-1970s, but like that psychological thriller, that little kind of enclosed paranoia type of space. Brad also promises that horror fans shouldn't worry because there will be absolutely plenty of blood and inventive kill sequences. That's the big thing with horror. Like, we like things to not be just like, oh, someone got stabbed or someone, I don't know, got decapitated. Like, we're like, find some fun, inventive ways that could even be funny. Like, we got to freshen things up here, right? It's not just going to rely on just violence alone. We're going to get inventive with this. Every murder is supposed to serve the characters and the story rather than existing just for shock value. One thing that I appreciate is that they are willing to interpret this mythology instead of simply recreating the original movie, like scene for scene. Because they could have just redone the movie. But like, horror fans can be incredibly protective of franchises. So the second anyone announces a new Halloween or a new Texas Chainsaw Massacre or a new Nightmare on Elm Street, all things that have happened very recently, or a new Friday the 13th project, people immediately start complaining that Hollywood has run out of ideas. Not me. Like, give them all to me. Some suck, some are great, some are meh, but like, I'm always here for it. Like, surprise me. I'd love to be more surprised and have some original concepts thrown in there, but like, I'm always into it. Like, give a new director the wheel. He can drive us wherever he wants to go. Okay. But sometimes Hollywood has run out of ideas. That can be true. But I do actually love when a new filmmaker comes in with fresh perspective on a classic property. If we're going to revisit these stories, I do not want carbon copies. I want someone to challenge the mythology, ask new questions, and tell stories that we've never seen before. Just like Rob Zombie's Halloween. Love it or hate it, I enjoy it. I didn't love it and I didn't hate it. I like it, but it was different. And I'm so into that. So that's exactly why I'm excited about Crystal Lake. It's not trying to replace the original. Like, the original Friday the 13th will always exist. Betsy Palmer's Pamela Voorhees will always be iconic. I can see her in my head right now screaming with that knife. Jason will always be one of the Mount Rushmore slasher villains. Like, none of that changes. What this series has the opportunity to do is deepen the emotional tragedy behind the entire franchise. And if they can make us empathize with Pamela before showing us the monster that she becomes and what her son becomes, suddenly every rewatch of the original movie is going to gain another layer because we're going to associate this new series now with the film. And honestly, A24 being involved does give me more confidence, although they've been like tied to a lot of AI stuff lately. And like AI filmmaking, although you need to know how to use AI, but I do think that it's not the most hmm. I don't think it should be used to make films and replicate people and actors and whatever, but perhaps that could be an interesting topic for an episode. But moving on, okay? So A24, whether it's Hereditary, The Witch, Talk to Me, or X, like they've constantly shown that they're interested in character driven horror rather than just an empty jump scare movie. Pairing that philosophy with one of horror's most legendary franchises could end up being something that is really special. Now, could it all fall apart? Absolutely. We have seen legacy horror franchises stumble plenty of times, but after watching this teaser, like I walked away feeling optimistic, not skeptical. It feels respectful, stylish. It feels like it actually has something to say beyond like, hey, remember Jason? Remember that hockey mask machete guy? Like that's exactly what I want from a franchise. I want a franchise that has been around for a gazillion years to say something new. So count me in. October 15th, cannot get here fast enough. I wish they should have just released it on October 13th, but I guess it would have been Friday. So, whatever. If this teaser is any indication, Crystal Lake might not just be another nostalgia play. It might actually become one of the year's most compelling horror series. And as someone who grew up loving all things horror and also enjoying Friday the 13th, although I grew up in like the 90s, early 2000s. So different versions. Even the one where Jason goes to space is fun and hysterical. I really can't wait to see someone take another stab at one of the greatest horror legends. So count me the fuck in. And now we're going to talk about the last thing that I want to discuss today. And that is another little remake, reboot, reiteration, reimagining that I am also ridiculously excited for. I can't say it enough. I love when creatives reimagine things and reinvent a franchise or reinvent a film that already exists. So we're going to look at Mike Flanagan's upcoming adaptation of Stephen King's Carrie, which is going to be on Amazon Prime. What a fucking mouthful. Mike Flanagan's upcoming adaptation of Stephen King's Carrie for Prime Video. Like, Lord, give me strength. Okay, so now Mike Flanagan is like one of the ultimate horror storytellers working today. You've definitely seen his stuff. The Haunting of Hill House, Midnight Mass, The Fall of the House of Usher, Dr. Sleep, Gerald's Game. Like, the man just understands horror in a way that very few filmmakers do. His work is never scary just for the sake of being scary. It's always emotional. It's so character driven. There are so many storylines woven together, and he really makes sure that you get to know these characters inside and out. It understands that the best horror comes from people first and monsters second. So when Amazon announced that he was tackling Carrie, like, count me on board immediately. On board. And now that we finally got our first look at the series, my excitement has gone up even more. The newly released images give us our first look at Summer H. Howell as Carrie White. And I think she looks great. Like, love it. Perfect. She's not trying to imitate Sissy Spacek or Chloe Grace Moretz. Like, this feels like its own interpretation of the character, which is exactly what I wanted. Carrie looks isolated in these photos, vulnerable, uncomfortable in her own skin, and there's like a little bit of sadness in her eyes that immediately reminds you why this character has remained one of horror's greatest tragic figures for more than 50 years. That's a long time. We also get our first look at Samantha Sloyan as Margaret White, and if you've watched any of Mike Flanagan's previous series, you already know that Samantha can be absolutely terrifying and intimidating and a wonderful actress. She's become one of Mike Flanagan's closest collaborators, and seeing her step into one of horror's most iconic maternal, I guess, villains, like, feels like a perfect casting. Another thing that I love about these photos is that they don't scream like, look, here's all the blood, because, we know Carrie gets a bucket of blood poured on her in both of those films and in the book. Instead, these pictures are leaning into the mood And they're also, giving you a peek at these more iconic scenes. Like they're all gonna laugh at you. And, I think we get a peek of that at least. Like everything looks grounded, cold, emotionally heavy. It feels less like a glossy teen drama and more like a psychological horror series. It does, the color grading feels a little bit CW, but I'm gonna hope that these are just from the images, right? But this psychological horror series vibe, that's very Mike Flanagan. He's never been interested in throwing gore at every scene every 5 minutes. He wants you to care about these people before everything completely falls apart. And looking at these images, that's exactly the vibe that I'm getting. What's even more exciting is that this isn't simply just another remake of the 1976 movie. Mike Flanagan has been very clear that he is adapting Stephen King's original novel, not remaking Brian De Palma's film. There is a difference. Those are two very different things. The original movie is an absolute masterpiece and probably one of the greatest Stephen King adaptations. The Shining, obviously fucking bomb as hell, but like Carrie, the original, love. I love. There's no reason to try to compete with that, like shot for shot. There's no reason. Instead, Flanagan is expanding the story into an 8-episode series that gives him room to explore the characters, their relationships, the mythology that previous adaptations just didn't have time to do. And one of the biggest changes, and honestly, one of the things that I think question mark that I'm most curious about is that the story has been updated to present day. So that means Carrie's bullying doesn't just happen in school hallways. It's happening online, it's happening through social media, it's happening 24 hours a day. And unfortunately, that's probably a more realistic version of high school than the one, Stephen King wrote in 1974. Because who could have known that social media would be such a shit show? Kids today, they don't get to escape anything. They don't get to go home and escape bullying. When they go home, it's still there. It follows them in their phones, their group chats, all their accounts, like everywhere. So Mike Flanagan has said that he wants to explore what isolation and humiliation look like in today's world. And I think that's an incredibly smart direction to take this story. It just adds another layer to it. Why put this in 1970 or whenever when you could update it and add this whole new fresh layer? But here's a piece of news that really caught my attention. So apparently, this series is going much bigger than previous adaptations. And Flanagan has hinted that the show is going to dive deeper into the idea of Carrie's telekinetic abilities and even expand on something that Stephen King briefly mentioned in the novel, which is the possibility that Carrie is not the only person with these powers. If you don't know, you should know. But if you don't know, Carrie can move things with her mind, right? So Stephen King mentioned in the novel that she's not the only one who can do this. So starting with the second episode, the series reportedly explores another woman across different points in time who possesses similar psychic abilities. And if that's true, this isn't just another adaptation of Carrie. It's potentially the beginning of an expanded mythology surrounding King's original concept. And I have to admit, that sounds intriguing. And I kind of dig sometimes, it depends on what it is, but when series have an episode that focuses on one person and then it completely shifts. It might be an episode of something that happened 20 years ago that connects to what's happening in current day. And then the third episode will come back to present era and like follow the character from the first episode. Do you get what I'm saying there? I think that makes sense. But I kind of enjoy that. Like, let's add some more history here, some more mythology. And I know whenever Hollywood touches a beloved horror classic, there's always the group of fans who immediately say, leave it alone. Stop remaking everything. That is not, I'm the opposite of that. Remake it all. And I understand the reaction, but that's just so not me. There are franchises that have been rebooted and remade into the ground, but I just like, give me more. Give me 27 more Chainsaw Massacre reboots, okay? But I've always believed that there's room for multiple interpretations of a great story. We don't stop performing Shakespeare because someone already did Hamlet. We don't stop making Dracula movies because like because Nosferatu came out again. Okay. Like great horror stories survive because every generation finds a new way to tell them. And I fucking love it. Tell me more. That's why I get excited about this. That's why I get excited about filmmakers like Mike Flanagan tackling these iconic properties, iconic directors and creators, iconic properties. Give it to me. Like he earned that trust. He has an incredible track record with Stephen King's work. And more importantly, he has always approached these stories with respect. He's not interested in changing things just to be controversial, just like let's completely switch this up so we can like piss people off. He changes things because he has something new to say. And there is a very big difference between that approach and changing things just to be crazy. Now, I think I want to say this is probably my most anticipated horror series of this year. I might have already said that with Crystal Lake, but between Crystal Lake reinventing Friday the 13th and Mike Flanagan giving us a new interpretation of Carrie, like it feels like we're entering a really exciting period where classic horror isn't just being recycled, it's being reimagined by filmmakers who genuinely love the source material. We just found out this week, well, when I'm recording this week, that Nightmare on Elm Street is going ahead, and it's being based on Wes Craven's original script, original concept, but it's not a complete remake or reboot, which is interesting. We know Texas Chainsaw Massacre is happening again with Glenn Powell attached, and I think A24 as well. I could be wrong there. Don't quote me on that. And Scream 7, didn't love it, but we know Scream 8 is happening, and I hope Scream 8 actually gives us what we want. I think they might learn some things from Scream 7, but like all of these classic horrors, like the Mount Rushmore fucking killers, are all coming back. But filmmakers that love the source material, that's what I'm saying. That's the sweet spot. They give these stories to people with fresh ideas, and instead of simply recreating the same movie over and over again, they're giving us a new take, a new look. And the first look images, did what they were supposed to. They didn't reveal too much. They didn't spoil the big moments. They just reminded us that Carrie's coming and that she remains one of the most heartbreaking stories in horror history. And Carrie's never really been it's like not about telekinesis, right? It is about her loneliness. It's about bullying. It's about religious extremism. It's about trauma. Clearly, I'm passionate about horror. The horror comes from watching this vulnerable young girl pushed to a breaking point. Like, hello, we can all relate. And if anyone can capture that emotional tragedy while still delivering the unforgettable horror moments that fans are waiting for, I honestly think Mike Flanagan is the perfect person for the job. And he said that bucket of blood is still happening and the prom is still happening, but it's going to be in a different way. So here for it. I can't wait to see. So consider me officially counting down the days until Carrie comes to Amazon Prime. And that, my friends, wraps up the very first episode of Screaming. And honestly, I'm losing my voice, but that was a lot of fun. Like, I forget how much I miss sitting down and talking about horror. There's always something happening in this genre. Like whether it's a surprise indie hit like Obsession, exciting new takes on legendary franchises like Crystal Lake, my out of the theater opinions on Evil Dead Burn, or like first looks at projects like Mike Flanagan's Carrie. Horror has never been more alive. And like, I'm glad I'm alive for it to be never more alive. Like, I can't wait to keep covering it for you all if you're listening, unless nobody's listening. I'm just covering it for myself. But no, I think, horror's got a place. Horror's big. People love horror. So I'm hoping that Screaming, this pod, will continue. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, the plan for now is to release one episode each month, round up the biggest horror news, trailers, reviews, casting announcements, first looks, etc., into one episode. But if enough of you start listening, if you share it with your friends, or, you share the episode on your socials and you're asking for more, of course, I will make more episodes. Like, I could do weekly. I mean, you could talk horror every day, all day. There's definitely enough horror news out there to justify making more episodes. So for now, again, there is not an Instagram account or website for Screaming, but you can stay up to date by following me on, either my podcast at _Hot Air Pod, which is my podcast, Hot Air with Joshua Robert, or my personal Instagram, which is _Joshua Robert. I always do an underscore. Like, why am I so weird like that? Like, that is where I'll be sharing the deets, posting the episodes, posting little clips. You know the drill, as podcasts do. And honestly, who knows? Maybe this is the beginning of the Hot Air Network. I'm into it. Like, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a global brand, baby. So, if you've enjoyed today's episode, I would love for you to share it with your horror fan friend or family member, loved one, or frenemy or enemy in your life. Send it to someone who is counting down the days to Halloween, just like I am, even though it's July. Send it to the person who pauses every trailer to analyze every frame, or send it to someone who's convinced that they've already seen every horror movie worth watching because maybe they'll learn something. And I always love to hear from people that listen to my podcast. So, you know what? Let me know what you thought about Obsession. Are you excited for Crystal Lake? Did you watch Evil Dead Burn? Are you on the Mike Flanagan Carrie train? Like, send me a message on my gram at underscore hot air pod. And thank you so much for listening, spending a little time with me today, blabbing on about something I love. That is just like, it feels like a release. I honestly feel like I went to the spa. I do have a martini over here, but it feels like I went to the spa. This is something I've been wanting to bring back for a long time. I'm really excited to finally have a place to celebrate my favorite genre with all of you. So until next time, keep the lights on and keep screaming.